there! Welcome to Menopause Taylor. That's me. I'm making sure you're highly educated about menopause and all that comes with it. And one of the most highly overlooked but highly treatable aspects of menopause for many women is high blood pressure. So that's our topic for today. This is the second to the last video in our unit on heart attack. It started way back in video 160, and I've gone through video by video in a very specific order, teaching you all the details about heart attack itself and all the options for lowering your risk. And the last 4 videos in this series, including the previous 2, this one and the next one, address other diseases that are closely associated with and commonly coexist with a high risk of heart attack. And high blood pressure is one of them. All this information is in chapter 28 of my book in both the first edition and the second edition. It's a good idea to get the book so that you have it as a convenient reference now and forever. And for all these chapters that I'm doing in this last 4 of the series, there is much more in these videos than there is in the book. This information on high blood pressure is really, really important. Please don't brush it off. Watching this video is another one that could save your life, so give it your full attention. I'll start with the basics. If you've watched my videos, you know that I always start at the very beginning, and I just like to assume you know nothing, and that's because you just don't know what you don't know. So you've heard various words, you've heard various sound bites about this and that, and you've heard people talk about so-and-so who had this or that, but you probably haven't really studied most of the things you hear. You may not have had the time or the interest, or it may not have ever been that important to you, and that's fine until it's not. And this is that time when it becomes imperative for you to understand these things. No woman of menopausal age, or even those prematurely menopausal, can afford to postpone learning these things any longer. So I'm here to make learning them really easy for you. First, I'll tell you some of the terms that are interchangeable with the term high blood pressure. Sometimes you don't realize that you have a certain disease simply because the terms used to label it aren't the same ones you've heard before. So here's a list of all the terms that are consistent with or involve high blood pressure. There's high BP, high pressure, elevated blood pressure, elevated BP, increased blood pressure, increased BP, hypertension, high tension, primary hypertension, essential hypertension, secondary hypertension, rebound hypertension, hyperactive urgency, hypertensive emergency, and hypertensive crisis. Do you see what I mean? I've heard women say things like, I have high blood pressure, but I don't have hypertension. That's like saying, I have sisters and brothers, but I don't have any siblings. They're the same thing. And it's a real shame when you don't realize that you have a disease simply because you didn't recognize the term used to label it. If you have any of these things I've listed, this video is for you. Now, once you know that all these terms imply the same disease process, you need to know that some are more serious than others. There are always degrees of severity with any disease. I'm just going to use the term high blood pressure for simplicity. And next you need to know the definition of this disease process. High blood pressure is when the force of the blood against the walls of your arteries is higher than it should be. It's like water pressure. Here's a faucet. If I turn the water on so that it flows under very little pressure, it trickles out of the faucet. But if I turn the water on full blast, I'm increasing the pressure behind it so that it blasts out of the faucet. But the blood in your body has no outlet. The blood in your body just circulates round and round. So if the pressure of your blood flow is high, it pounds on the arterial walls in your body as it flows from one part of your body to another. Wherever it travels, it blasts in and out, pummeling the organs through which it travels. And all that pummeling damages your organs. Now, remember video 161 when I taught you that heart attacks are caused by arteries that become narrow because of the lipid buildup along the artery wall? I showed you this model. This model depicts progressive narrowing of an artery. As you can see, with more and more buildup of lipids in the artery, the space available for blood flow decreases. And that's a problem because the higher the pressure of your blood flow and the narrower your arteries, the higher your risk for heart attack and stroke. But it's also a problem because the less space there is for blood flow, the higher the pressure of that blood flow. Your heart is nothing but a pump. It's a big muscle that pumps blood. That's it. I know we attribute a lot of emotion to our hearts, but the truth is, your heart is nothing but a big lump of muscle. Physiologically, all it does is contract and relax, just like any other muscle. So your heart is what creates your blood pressure. And your blood pressure reading consists of two different pressure readings. The first number represents the force of blood as it leaves your heart. So it's the pressure of your blood when your heart contracts. It's your blood flow at its highest pressure. The second number represents the force of blood after your heart contracts. It's the pressure of your blood when your heart releases and relaxes and fills with more blood. So it's your blood flow at its lowest pressure. So if this faucet were controlled by a beating heart, the water flow from the faucet would be something like this. So your heart causes your blood pressure to alternate between its highest and its lowest pressures over and over and over again, all day and all night. Well, we have names for the high and low pressures of your blood. The high pressure, when your heart is contracting and forcing blood into your arteries, is called systole. Think of S for squeezing. Systole is a noun. Its adjective is systolic. So the high pressure is your systolic blood pressure. The low pressure, when your heart is relaxing and refilling with blood, is called diastole. Think of D for don't squeeze. Diastole is a noun. Its adjective is diastolic. So the low pressure is your diastolic blood pressure. Now, your blood pressure reading consists of two numbers, the systolic and the diastolic. And we represent them as a fraction. So it's systolic blood pressure over diastolic blood pressure. When these two numbers are high, your blood is pumped under higher pressure. That means more blood fills your heart than under normal circumstances. And it also means that your heart has to pump more blood out than it does under normal circumstances. So the problem with high blood pressure is that it increases the workload of your heart. And the harder your heart works, the higher your blood pressure gets. And the higher your blood pressure gets, the more it damages all your organs. It is truly a vicious cycle of damage all over your body simply because your blood vessels travel to every single millimeter of your body. Ultimately, high blood pressure causes all of the following: heart attack, stroke, emboli, which are blood clots that break off and travel to other parts of your body, kidney failure, and blindness. I think you can already see how critical your blood pressure is to the rest of your health. So let's talk about the symptoms of high blood pressure. That will further your understanding even more. So, what are the early symptoms of high blood pressure? Well, you see, that's the problem. There are none. In fact, high blood pressure is so notorious for causing no symptoms until it's too late that it has another name that I didn't include on that list I showed you. Its most accurate name of all is the silent killer. You can have high blood pressure for years and years and have not a single symptom. In fact, that's the most common scenario of all for the silent killer. But the absence of symptoms does not mean there is an absence of damage to your organs. While you're carrying on with your life with nary a clue that anything is wrong, bam, you drop dead of a heart attack. Or bam, you have a stroke. Thus, the silent killer. Occasionally, you can have symptoms, but they aren't specific for high blood pressure. And if they are, it's usually already life-threatening. They include headaches, nosebleeds, shortness of breath, and visual disturbances. Most people don't think about their blood pressure as the culprit when they have symptoms like these. You know, I've often thought that it's a whole lot better to have symptoms than to have no symptoms for any disease. Symptoms are your body's way of saying, wake up, something's wrong. Symptoms make you uncomfortable. They nag at you to get some help. Diseases with no symptoms are like sneaky murderers that creep up on you without warning. I'll take a disease with symptoms any day over one without. I often say you are not lucky if you have no symptoms of menopause. I say that because the women with no symptoms feel no need to learn about menopause or get any kind of help. They feel fine. Their absence of symptoms makes them mistakenly believe that they are fine, so they do nothing. And they are the ones who have heart attacks, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's simply because they never learn that menopause causes these diseases. Unfortunately, high blood pressure is the most common medical problem worldwide. 1 out of every 2.5 adults has high blood pressure. This means that 40% of adults have high blood pressure. This also means that high blood pressure contributes to more than half of the deaths worldwide. It's a real shame. So, if there are no symptoms, how do you diagnose high blood pressure? You take your blood pressure regularly. You should have your blood pressure checked at every doctor's visit, and you should have it checked at least every 6 months. And you should even check it yourself from time to time. There are nifty blood pressure devices in every drugstore and in every pharmacy department. They're very easy to use. Here's one that you just put on your arm and you push a button. It's so simple. You stick the thing around your arm, attach it, and you push the button, and it gives you the number. You don't have to do anything. It's reading my blood pressure right now. The cuff is tightening, and voila, there it is. 110/60. I'm in good shape. When you check it, you're going to get 2 numbers. The systolic blood pressure over the diastolic blood pressure. If either one of them is higher than normal, label yourself as having high blood pressure. Here are the parameters for blood pressure. In the first column, you see the diagnosis. This is designated by level of severity. In the second column, you see the systolic blood pressure. That's the higher number, designating your blood pressure when your heart contracts. In the third column, you see the words and or. That's because some of these diagnoses require both blood pressure numbers to be abnormal. Others only require one of them to be abnormal. And in the fourth column, you see diastolic blood pressure. That's the lower number, designating your blood pressure when your heart relaxes and fills up with blood again. For your blood pressure to be normal, you see in the second row that your blood pressure has to be lower than 120 systolic and lower than 80 diastolic. So as long as both numbers qualify, you're fine. In the third row, you see that to have a diagnosis of elevated blood pressure, your systolic blood pressure is between 120 and 129, and your diastolic blood pressure is still below 80. So the only number that can be a little out of whack is the top one. In the fourth row, you see that for a diagnosis of stage 1 high blood pressure, only one of the two numbers has to be elevated. The systolic can be between 130 to 139, or the diastolic can be between 80 and 89. In the fifth row, you see that for a diagnosis of stage 2 high blood pressure, again, only one of the two numbers has to be elevated. The systolic can be greater than or equal to 140, and the diastolic can be greater than or equal to 90. Now, I'll warn you, as of 2018, these parameters are more strict than they used to be. So in other words, qualifying for high blood pressure is changing now so that you still can have a lower blood pressure and you're still considered hypertensive. And since so many people have high blood pressure, and because lowering the threshold for a diagnosis of high blood pressure will create more work for already overworked physicians, you may very well encounter a physician who still uses outdated guidelines and tells you that you don't have high blood pressure unless your numbers are 140/90. Do not settle for that. It is no longer correct. If your numbers are even a smidgen higher than 120/80, you have high blood pressure, period. And it's time to do something about it. Find a different doctor if necessary. So despite the absence of symptoms, diagnosis is really quick and easy. You don't need a blood test. You don't need a second opinion. Heck, you don't even have to go to get a diagnosis from a doctor. You can diagnose yourself with a store-bought automatic blood pressure machine. But don't make up silly rules. If your blood pressure is high once, please see a doctor. There's nothing here that says it has to be high multiple times. But here's how significant high blood pressure can be. There is a direct linear relationship between high blood pressure and heart attack. And there's a direct linear relationship between high blood pressure and stroke. An increase of your systolic pressure of 20 millimeters mercury or an increase of your diastolic blood pressure of 10 millimeters mercury doubles your risk of heart attack. And that's from a baseline blood pressure of 115/75. If your blood pressure is higher than that, your risk of heart attack more than doubles with each increase. And here's why I urge you to make the diagnosis early. Treatment is so easy. No one should ever die from high blood pressure. Dietary changes are all that some people need to correct their blood pressure. There's actually something called the DASH diet. DASH is an acronym for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It's nothing you haven't heard before. The DASH diet consists of eating mostly fruit, vegetables, nuts, and whole grains. For animal products, it includes fish and poultry rather than red meats. And as with just about every diet, it stipulates decreasing sugar, sweets, animal fats, and of course, sodium. The DASH diet can decrease your systolic blood pressure by about 5 millimeters mercury and your diastolic blood pressure by about 3 millimeters of mercury. And it can improve your blood pressure even if you don't lose any weight. It is especially important to eat very little sodium if you have any degree of high blood pressure. Sodium, that's salt. And significantly lowering your sodium can reduce your systolic blood pressure by 5 to 20 millimeters of mercury. All the dietary options for reducing a heart attack that I gave you in videos 169, 170, and 171 are perfect for reducing your blood pressure. They include low fat, high fiber, and low sugar. And drinking less alcohol is critical for lowering your blood pressure. That alone can reduce both your systolic and diastolic pressure by 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury. 1 drink a day is good. More than that is not. Likewise, all the lifestyle and exercise options I gave you in videos 172 and 173 are perfect for lowering your blood pressure too. These include no smoking, weight control, regular exercise. If you exercise for 40 minutes, 3 to 4 times each week, you can reduce your systolic blood pressure by 5 millimeters of mercury and your diastolic blood pressure by 3 millimeters of mercury. Now, these reductions may not sound like a lot, but for your arteries, they're huge improvements. And the longer you stick with good diet and exercise habits, the lower they'll get. None of the diet or lifestyle measures for reducing your risk of heart attack, stroke, or high blood pressure is something that you should do only temporarily. These are permanent changes you'll need to make. Oh, and guess what? All those vitamins, minerals, and supplements that I presented in video 174, well, they're good for your blood pressure too. They included calcium and magnesium, more potassium and less sodium, the B vitamins 3, 6, 9, and 12, vitamin C, vitamin E, CoQ10, L-carnitine, and alpha-lipoic acid. Granted, none of these vitamins, minerals, or supplements is good enough alone. And none of these things will create huge decreases in your blood pressure. But every little bit helps. Even all of them together are no substitute for more effective treatments like the medications I'll discuss in a minute. With high blood pressure, don't play around. Treat it aggressively from the start. And the herbs I presented to you in video 176 will help a bit too. They included hawthorn, phytoestrogens, red clover, licorice root, hops, and wild yam. So now I want to tell you a little bit about high blood pressure medications. There are so many of them. They're easy to take, they're inexpensive, and they work. Please, please don't be cavalier about this. If you have high blood pressure, start taking a medication now. Don't wait. Diet and exercise management take time. Go ahead and get your blood pressure down with a medication. It's just too risky not to address this seriously. If you become a gym rat and adopt the perfect diet, then you can possibly consider tapering off your medication. But be realistic. The fact is that most people who need medication for high blood pressure need it for the rest of their lives. And as long as they continue taking it for the rest of their lives, the rest of their life can be very long. If not, it's usually pretty short. And now I'll just tell you a little bit about high blood pressure and HRT. It's very common for a doctor to refuse to give you HRT if your blood pressure is high. It's all about risk. If your blood pressure is high, that alone puts you at high risk for heart attack, stroke, and blood clots. While HRT offers more benefits than risks in circumstances of normal blood pressure, the opposite is true with high blood pressure. This is very consistent with what I taught you about heart attacks. If you take HRT before you have hardening of your arteries, its benefits outweigh its risks. But if you take HRT after you already have hardening of your arteries, its risks outweigh its benefits. The very same principle applies to blood pressure. Get your blood pressure under control first and foremost. That alone will decrease your risk for everything else. And then you can consider HRT. Alrighty, to summarize, high blood pressure is the most common disease anywhere, and it produces no symptoms. That's why it's called the silent killer. If your blood pressure is over 120/80, you have high blood pressure, and that warrants treatment with a blood pressure lowering medication. In addition to medication, change your diet and lifestyle accordingly, and you can live happily ever after. Many of the women who have consultations with me do so for help in managing their blood pressure so that they can take HRT. If you need me to do that with you, I'll be happy to do so. Just schedule a consultation at menopausetailor.me. And join me next week when I'll give you the last tutorial in the heart attack unit. It will be on diabetes, and it's more important than you can possibly imagine. Until then, subscribe, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll see you later. Bye.